Hello everyone and welcome to today's lecture. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be learning how to do different kinds of animation, specifically using a technique called motion tweening. Now to get that, and basically to kind of say what that does, this is basically going to allow us to rotate, change the position, scale, and the opacity, and also a couple other little rules that'll hopefully help us when we're going through this process. So first we'll be creating our symbols, go into some motion tweening, and then we're going to do some simple animations with what we're doing with these, and also use it for practical purposes. Once that's done, we're also going to get into rigging, basically how we could set up different elements to be connected to each other in certain ways, and we're also going to go into rigging a character this way as well. Now to get the ball rolling, so to speak, we're going to go into Animate, and we're just going to make ourselves a new file. It is going to be the HD resolution. Make sure that the frame rate is 24 frames a second. And yeah, we can just create it from here. Okay. Now, to get the ball rolling again, we're going to make ourselves a simple shape. Now, little refresher from last time. That if we want to make our shape that we have here into a symbol, you can select the entire object as a whole, and then you could either go to modify, convert to symbol, or alternatively, if you double click here, right click, and choose the option, convert to symbol, or hit F8, that also works too. And I'm going to call this square. Make sure it's a graphic, we don't need anything too fancy. And make sure that the registration is in the center. That just makes things a little bit easier for us. And hit OK. And that's our first object. Now remember, a nice thing about this is, should we need to bring this in and again, we do have that option, making this process way easier. Okay. Now, the way we're going to get started is we're going to make a 1-second animation of this box basically moving. Now to get started with that, we are going to basically move the box into the position we need this to be in. We're going to use the insert frame by going to the frame we want. That's basically second 1 or 24 frames. Use the insert frame, and there we are. Now, to actually make this animatable, this is where the new topic comes in. We're going to go to Insert while that layer is selected. That part's important. There we are. And choose an option called Create Motion Tween. And you'll notice that your layer basically changes its type. So it goes from this symbol into this symbol, letting you know that a motion tween is basically created. Now what this basically means is we can basically take any kind of movement we have. So basically the first frame that we have here, because it is shown, that's your first keyframe. And yeah, we could just basically move this over to the side while the time slider's on the other is where we want the animation to stop in this case. And you'll notice that motion is made. So we didn't have to draw this over and over and over again. All the animation's put in almost immediately. Now this is using a technique called auto keying. What that basically means is once we put our time slider wherever we want this to be, in this case it's in the middle of the animation, I can move this straight up, and the key will already be made for us. And I got to admit, that's a pretty cool thing to have. Now, one of the reasons a person might be asking, why would we animate this way? Well, if we're trying to animate simple elements, it's definitely a lot easier than having to animate it frame by frame. But at the same time, it is a little bit limiting in some cases versus if we were animating this frame by frame like what we did with the ball and the flour sack. But at the same time, a mixture of both could end up making the animation process a little bit easier. And you'll also notice that it's very similar to what we did with After Effects. One of the reasons why I wanted to teach that to everyone first, so you could get used to this way of thinking. Big thing that's kind of nice about this, though, is it's using a technique called auto keying. But this also has a downside, too. If you don't remember to animate every single part, it is going to be a little bit of a pain in the butt to work with. Not to mention, it's not quite as perfect as the previous method that we were using. Now that's going to come up a little bit as we progress. But let's take a look at that. Okay, so now we basically have our motion done. Let's make ourselves a new layer. So I'm going to name this position. And I'm going to make a new layer. I'm just going to hide this one for now. Same square. And yeah, I'll just put it here for now. And I'm going to do the same thing. Insert, create motion tween. And I'm going to actually rotate this a little bit. Only thing you got to watch out for is basically how you'd want to rotate this. Easiest way to go about this is using the free transformation tool, or just hit Q. Just a bit of a heads up though. If you do any kind of rotations, by default, it is going to be done in the center. However, that's not just the only way that you can animate this. You could also move your pivot point down a little bit to basically make that work here. So that's actually kind of a nice way that you could start this as well. Now, the only thing you got to watch out for is when you're animating this, it sometimes has some difficulty if you're trying to animate past the 180-degree line. Let me show you what I mean. So if I was to go to frame 12 and animate this like so, getting close to the 180 area, there's probably not going to be any problems. But if I try to go past this, it basically tries to animate in the simplest way possible. So in other words, it basically tries to cheat. So that's one of those things you kind of have to watch out for when you're animating with this. But still, if you want to animate this all the way around, you could animate this at, say, let's say if this is 12, I can go to frame 6, go all the way down here, or about the halfway point. Or better yet, if you hold down Shift, it basically goes in increments like this. So there's my first increment. And then I just go here for my second. And if it works out the way it's supposed to, there shouldn't be any problems. But as you can see here, there's some minor issues. So you have to be kind of careful of this when you're working with that. Now, that being said, you can actually get rid of keyframes if necessary, simply by right-clicking. And you could use the option remove, remove the frame. But you got to be careful because check out what happens. You basically lose a frame right there. So not the biggest problem with this, but you just need to basically bring this back. So let's see. So if I need this to continue rotating around, I could continue going in that way. And then basically go in other several frames. I think this would be up to 18. And then basically have this go to its starting point. So a bit of a pain in the butt. And yeah, you're going to definitely have to rearrange and change a couple things. So you have to be careful when working with this. So in short, if you want to rotate 180 degrees, it is possible, but you have to kind of really work for it. So definitely, but if you're just doing simple 180 degree rotations, shouldn't have an issue, and that's mostly going to be what we're going to be doing anyways. So just a couple things to watch out for there. Okay, so going to make myself a new layer here, going to freeze, turn that off, and I am going to rename this rotation. And I'm going to put this as scale. And I'm going to put this in here again. So this is already a symbol, and that's why it's working the way that it is. Now, little refresher that if you were to scale this in, it is going to scale in the center. But again, if you take the pivot point that's over here, though this is still in the free transform, say I put this in the corner, well, this is going to scale in the corner instead. If I put this in the bottom part over here, it's going to scale at the bottom part like that. So it is something to consider when you have to do this kind of work. Now, honestly, you're probably not going to need to do a lot of fancy scaling, but at least it's good to know. And plus, it's always good to repeat some of these elements that I have to do over here. So let us go into the next part, which is basically going to, there we are. And that is basically animating the scale of this. So we're going to go to Insert, Create Motion Tween. And again, in this case, I'm going to scale this like so, just to get started. And then scale this out of existence like so. So now when I create my little animation like so, you're basically seeing what's going on there. So relatively easy peasy in most of these cases. So give this a try yourself if you can. I'll pause the video for a moment, and then we'll get into some other elements that can help with your animation, specifically with the motion, because that's going to have a little bit more potential for us. But take a moment, make your own shapes, make sure that you have basically created yourself a symbol for it by creating the object and then converting to symbol and such. So once you have done that, we should be able to get into the next step, which is basically changing the keys, because at this point right now, we really don't have that much options when basically going with the motion. And to be honest, it isn't looking that great. So giving you a moment. Okay, then in that case, let's get into the next step, which is basically changing the keys around a little bit. So as you see right over here, if I hit play for this, it basically has a very consistent and somewhat boring motion to this. So that's not going to be very ideal for us. Because what if we want this to be kind of like similar to what we have with the bouncing ball, where it goes up from the ground very quickly and then goes directly in the air, but has a little bit of hang time, and put this down. Well, this is where the pen tool, or specifically the convert anchor point tool, is going to come into play. Because if we want to change that key around, that's possible. Because I could actually go in here, and I can, as you can see here, it's a little hard to see, so I'll bring back the box for this. Yeah, there we are. That's going to make things way easier. So I'm using the anchor point tool, similar to what we did with Illustrator, and I'm bringing this out so that the arc ends up a little bit nicer. Now this is going to be a huge help to some of the stuff we're going to be doing later. So that's definitely going to be very helpful for us. So yeah, if you're ever in a situation where that needs to be adjusted and changed, that's how you can do it. More so, if you want to basically see a visual representation of your keys, you can double click this area down here, and you could see a little bit of a representation on how the keys are working. So that actually could be a helpful little option for us. So basically, again, we see this going up and then over, and that's basically how this works in this case. So let's see if I can bring this up a little bit so you can see it a little easier. There we go. Now that's happening. Okay, and if we want to do some more stuff with this, it is possible that we could simply by, again, we're not just limited to just one change in this. So for example, if I want to rotate this a little bit as I'm going along, that's possible. So I can select this as is, and I'm just going to add a little bit of rotation. Basically, just rotate this forward, then back, nothing big. And then I'm going to rotate this about, let's see, if I go up here, I'm going to rotate this a little bit in this area. .45 degrees. Yeah, so I'll put it there for now. But as you can see, it's slowly rotating. And then I can add another area like this to basically make that go a little bit further. Again, you have to be a little careful with the animation when you're doing this, because sometimes it's going to get a little bit strange when you're doing the rotations. But for position, scale, and rotation, that should work actually pretty easy. So give these a try if you can, and if you feel brave enough, feel free to mix and match a couple areas too. So for example, I could, if I wanted to, add a little bit of a squash. Ooh, before that, yeah, I could add a little bit of a squash in here. And then I could put this back to normal. And then when it lands, I could squash this over like so. There we go. That's where it gets a little bit on the strange side. And just try this out on simple objects first before we get into more complex stuff. So I see we're at about the 15-minute mark, so I'm going to pause this first video, and then for the next video we'll do something actual practical. And this next part is going to be part of the assignment, but we'll keep it pretty simple for the first part. So get ready for the next video momentarily, and hopefully you found this useful. So stop in video now.